Welcome to Lair the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, a first in my new series of what I'm calling Outer Layer. This is where I take a moment to talk about some of the guilty pleasures in my music listening. These are artists, bands, and albums that fall outside of the normal listening that I talk about on this show. I talk about hard rock and heavy metal, 70s stuff all the time. But I listen to a lot of stuff outside of that too. And this is actually a frequently asked question in the comments section. Even going all the way back to when I did my first question and answer session, somebody asked there, hey, can you do a video on some of your guilty pleasures? So I have a lot of guilty pleasures, so I thought I would sort of break them up into sort of categories. So the theme of this episode today is kind of 80s synth and keyboard pop MTV type stuff. Now you got to remember, because of my age, I was a teenager right when I was a young teen right when MTV was first coming out. So MTV had a big impact on my listening. And although I was, knee deep into heavy metal and hard rock and classic rock at that point, I was still very affected by a lot of the stuff that was on MTV. And although when I was younger, if it didn't have heavy guitar in it, I kind of strayed away from it. When I got older, I revisited a lot of these acts that, maybe I liked one or two songs from a video that I heard on MTV and went out and bought their albums. So, all right, so here we go. The first one I have here is Gary Newman and Replicas and the Tubeway Army before he was just strictly Gary Newman. And I also wanted to show the Pleasure Principle. I could have sworn I had that Gary Newman album in my collection, but I don't. I actually like Pleasure Principle a little bit better than this one. Pleasure Principle is the album that has Cars on it. And what I like about Gary Newman is he's got this weird voice, first of all, and I can understand how that could be a total turn off for a lot of people. He has this bizarre, robotic alien voice, so he sounds like he's from another planet. And there's a ton of kind of heavy synthesizer stuff on his albums, especially the Pleasure Principle. This one is a little bit more mixture. You hear a little bit more guitar and stuff. But I really like these kind of darker synth sounds that he uses. Like on the Pleasure Principle, there's all these kind of heavy, low synths, kind of taking the place of what would be like a distorted guitar. For instance, there's a song on the Pleasure Principle called Metal that, for all intents and purposes, it's a metal riff. If those are big power chords, it would be heavy metal, but he's using synthesizers. And I have a soft spot for these kind of early 80s, late 70s synthesizer type sounds, because again, remember my age, I was hearing a lot of this on MTV, and I remember local cover bands that I would hear at an outdoor festival, an outdoor event or something in my town, and they always had keyboards in them, and they always had that very 80s keyboard sound. So whenever I hear 80s style keyboards, it sort of takes me back to that time. And that's what I think with Gary Newman. He's got these sort of layered, lower pitched kind of keyboard sounds that gives his stuff sort of a little bit of a dark overtone, a little bit of a heavy overtone. So it sort of makes sense as a metalhead why I would be drawn to Gary Newman. He kind of plays a lot of these minor key stuff. He's got a really weird sort of alien voice. His lyrics are sort of strange. And some artists have done covers of the song Cars, for instance, because that's just a great heavy riff. I think it was Fear Factory, I think, did a cover of Cars, and it sounded great because even though the riff is played on the keyboards in the original one, you put it on a distorted heavy guitar and it sounds super heavy. So, all right, continuing in that vein of keyboard stuff and MTV. Now, I have mentioned in other videos that I am a sucker for melodic stuff, like poppy stuff. For instance, I've said Since You've Been Gone, from Rainbows Down to Earth, and All Night Long. I love those songs. I love very catchy, well-written, concise 3-minute and 20-second pop songs. I think when it's really done right, it's a beautiful thing. And this band does it really, really well on their first album. So the first Cars album, and this isn't too far out from some of the stuff I talk about on here. I mean, there's electric guitar on this, but there's a lot of keyboards. I mean, this album is just jam-packed with all kinds of hits. You've got Good Times Roll, My Best Friend's Girl. I mean, that's just, oh man, it's so well produced on here. It's so catchy, even if you don't like this kind of stuff. I mean, you gotta admit, when you hear My Best Friend's Girl, it sticks in your head. And this album, I don't remember what year this came out. This kind of like 78 or 79. I always think of the Cars as an 80s band, but the album that I really love from them, this album, it came out in like 78, 79. I think I didn't do my research here beforehand. Let me see, 78. Yeah, so this came out in 78. Just What I Needed, another great sort of power pop. I'm in Touch with Your World. Don't Just Stop. You're All I've Got Tonight. Bye Bye Love. I love Moving in Stereo. So cool. I mean, just like so many songs off this record were big hits, and I just love it. Rick Ocasek has a great kind of quirky, unique voice. Benjamin Orr, he has a cool voice too. He's a real cool bass player. And the songs, they're simple, but they've got little interesting little twists, little interesting, whether it be chord progressions or a bass line or something that just, to me, is just really creative. And I really admire people that can make a 3-minute and 20-second song, still have it be creative, still have it be super catchy, and they do that really well. Here's Candy-O, which I don't like this one as much. It's got some cool stuff. Let's Go. The last 2 songs on the album I really like. Got a lot on my head. I really like Dangerous Type. But this one, it just doesn't work quite as well as it does on this one. I mean, to me, this is just a fantastic, I don't know what you would call it, new wave? Is this the start of new wave? I don't know. But it's just great, catchy songs. Love it. All right. Going along with the keyboard theme, Devo, Freedom of Choice. You've probably heard me talk in my videos about having an uncle that was only 10 years older than me, and he influenced me while he was listening to Kiss and Ted Nugent, and that's where I heard Kiss for the first time and would record the Kiss albums from him. And oddly enough, he was also into Devo, and he had a bunch of Devo records, and I remember really liking this one. And this, to me, is just, it's funny. The lyrics, I mean, Whip It on here, you know, the video again, here's MTV. It's sort of a funny song. I love The Girl You Want. I love that little guitar riff in the beginning. It's got this, they always have this sort of slightly funky feel to a lot of the things that they did, but in this sort of real robotic kind of way. I love the bizarre lyrics and their look and everything. And what else do we got on here? Mr. B's Ballroom is cool. Planet Earth is pretty cool. The title track, Freedom of Choice, you know, so fun. Again, when I think of Devo, man, I think of real 80s synth MTV. So I don't have any other Devo albums in my collection. Not really interested enough to explore them further, but this is a fun guilty pleasure album for me. All right, the next one. I think I'm attracted to this band because this I've probably mentioned, and you've seen me play bass here on the channel. I'm a bass player. So Duran Duran. Dave got some really fantastic bass playing, and I forget the guy's. Is it John Taylor? I forget his name right now, but just a great album. Again, super catchy pop stuff. I mean, you hear this, Rio. What a great catchy song. Again, MTV. Hungry Like the Wolf. New Religion is cool. Save a Prayer is cool. Lots of keyboards, but it's super catchy. I think what attracted me to Duran Duran is the fantastic bass playing, you know, very much like Bernard Edwards from Chic. It's very funky, disco-like bass playing, but in this sort of power pop, keyboard heavy MTV sound. You know, this is another band. When I think of early MTV, I think of Duran Duran. I mean, they just ruled MTV, and their videos were cool and their videos were catchy. So, all right, here we go. Last one, maybe the king of the 80s, one of the biggest selling albums of all time, Michael Jackson, Thriller. I love this record. This is like, just an example of a super well produced album. I did a video on albums that aren't produced very well, but that I still like. And I was thinking about making a video on really well produced albums, and this would be one of them. Fantastic. And the songwriting on here is just great. Michael Jackson, say what you want about him, where, he got really bizarre later on in his life. But at this point, he was just a great soul, rhythm and blues singer, such a great melodic voice, such a unique range. So many hits on this record. I mean, you've got The Girl Is Mine, Beat It with Eddie Van Halen on the guitar solo there, Billie Jean, Human Nature, Pretty Young Thing, and of course the epic Thriller. If you're a child of the 80s and MTV, I mean, Thriller. I remember staying up and waiting for that to come on, and my parents debating if they should let me watch it or not, because there was all this talk about there being occult references in the video. I mean, absolutely silly by today's standards, but I mean, what can you say? It's a super massive selling album. It's one of the biggest selling albums of all time. And, I got a soft spot for funky, soulful soul and rhythm and blues and that kind of stuff. And I'm going to be making another video on that stuff. And I'm actually a big fan of the Jackson 5. So it makes sense that I would also dig this album. There's a lot of great arrangements on here and super cool playing. So there you go. Michael Jackson. Can't say I have any of his other stuff, but I mean, Thriller. It's maybe the biggest album of the 80s. All right, so there you go. There's some of my guilty pleasures in sort of the MTV keyboard pop, new wave-ish style vein. There's other people that I listen to too, but I don't have any other albums. I don't have Thomas Dolby, I think is fun. Who's the other? I like a lot. I've got an 80s playlist on Spotify, sort of these one of Big Country and The Outfield and things like that. Even Rick Springfield I thought was a lot of fun. Some of his stuff, I mean, Jesse's Girl, who can't sing along to that when it comes on the radio. So, all right, there you go. There's some of my guilty pleasures. Let me know in the comments down below. Do you guys have any guilty pleasures from this MTV era? This sort of 80s power pop, new wave, skinny tie stuff, keyboard stuff? Let me know in the comments down below. There's going to be more outer layer stuff coming, more guilty pleasures from different styles of music. So watch out for that. Hit like and subscribe, the bell icon and all that stuff. Check out Lair the Alchemist on social media. And until we see you again, I want my MTV.